All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, October 3rd, 2018. Come to order. I'd like to start off by doing the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd like to join me, let's do. Flags over here tonight. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I know, I'm sorry I blocked you. For the benefit of those who may or may not have participating in a Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, our procedures are as follows. 1, we're going to read the legal call to the meeting as published in the local newspapers. 2, the applicant will be invited to come forward and present the case, explaining to the commission and others present what's being requested of the property. Comments of town agencies will be read for each application if there are any. 3, there's going to be clarifying questions from the commissioners. 4, there'll be an opportunity for clarifying questions from the audience. 5, first, those who wish to support an application may come forward, and second, those who oppose the application will be then invited to come forward and express their opinion. As this is a public hearing and must be recorded, it's necessary for speakers to identify themselves by stating their name and address before addressing this commission. 6, the applicant is then free to leave or remain for the balance of the public hearing at the regular meeting, at which time the commission will try to reach a decision on each application. Each applicant will be notified in writing as to the decision of the commission and has a right to appeal in Superior Court if desired. 7, the decisions of this meeting are available the day after the meeting by calling the Planning and Zoning Office at 453-8039 after 9 a.m. So seated this evening are the following members. We have Scott Edmond, we have Jason Markey, Alan Brown, I'm Frank DeAndrea, Dick Wallace, Sean Cosgrove. The staff tonight, we have George Kroll, we have Aaron Mannix, we have Lisa Piambino, and our videographer this evening is Peter Schultz. Will the secretary read our legal notice, please?
Notice is hereby given that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing on October 3rd, 2018 at 7:30 p.m. The location being the Nathaniel B. Green Community Center, 32 Church Street, Guilford, Connecticut, in the Mononkatuk Room on the second floor for the following purposes. Laurie D. Barnada, 131 Old Quarry Road, Map 6, Lot 6A, Zone R5, Coastal Area Management for removal of 2 underground oil tanks and replacement of one 1,000-gallon tank. 66 High Street, Map 32/32, Lot 60 to 64, Zone I1/R3, special permit modification for site work including shoreline stabilization in compliance with the Connecticut DEEP consent order to remove a portion of a site wall installed with coastal jurisdiction line and construction of an in-ground pool and support facilities. Copies of these applications are available for inspection at the office of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Town Hall South, 50 Boston Street, Guilford, Connecticut. At this hearing, persons may attend and be heard, and written communications will be received. Dated at Guilford, Connecticut, this 11th day of September 2018. Philip Johnson, Chairman. Sort of an ominous date.
Yes. All right, we will call the first public hearing. This is actually the second public hearing on this. Is James Goodman, 86 Middle Road. Hi. Can you just go up to that mic? And remember, that's not for amplification. That's just so the camera can pick you up. So if you could talk into that one, that'd be great.
Is this good?
Yep. Close to that mic, so they.
Closer.
Yeah, they want to get you on TV.
I'm James Goodman. I live up at 86 Middle Road in Guilford Lakes, and my application is in regards to me keeping some golden pheasants on my property. And I wrote a letter just to try to summarize and keep my part of this short. So I'd like to read that to you now and then pass it around. 25 years ago, as newlyweds, my wife and I planned to move to Connecticut to start our new life together. We were encouraged to explore the shoreline, and when driving from Branford to Guilford, saw a big sign that said, "Welcome to an agricultural community." We found countless businesses run by well-respected descendants of their founders, a school system with an impeccable reputation, and beautiful vistas, all nestled along a shoreline steeped in rich history and opportunity. We purchased property here that was surrounded by good neighborly people and less than 2 blocks from beautiful lakes bordering Timberlands Preserve. Guilford became the place to raise our family with the values that we are passionate about, and these pheasants help us to attain that goal. All but one of my immediate neighbors have signed their support to keeping these pheasants on my property, and that particular neighbor has told town officials that he doesn't oppose my birds, that it's an issue with me. Everybody that has visited my property will confirm my desires to have aviaries that are in compliance, exceed the best husbandry practices, welcome suggestions, address any concerns, and continue to share our pheasants and our passion with this community. Our town officials will confirm that I have treated them with respect, acted in a timely manner, and followed all of their suggestions. My efforts have left my property in full compliance with the exception of my aviaries that are awaiting your decision. I'd like to thank you all very much for your time, consideration, and dedication to making the right decisions for Guilford. And that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, you can read that in.
I'm also giving you copies of 2 letters from community members that have come over and shared the experience of the whole project.
Okay, so before we get into more questions, does anybody want to pick up this letter from?
Phil.
No, from Dennis that was dated today?
I'll do that one.
Whoever has it
I
out.
said sure.
All right, go ahead.
Yes, this is a letter from Dennis Johnson, Director of Health. On September 26, 2018, an inspection of the applicant's active pheasant aviary was conducted by Aaron Mannix, ZEO, Kevin McGee, Environmental Planner, and I, Dennis Johnson, for the purpose of assessing the potential for pheasant wastewater runoff. It was observed during the inspection that the applicant's current pheasant aviaries consist of 4 hutch-type structures, each with soft tarp roofs. 3 of the units are not fully covered by the tarp and permit precipitation to enter the front of the pheasant enclosure. The location of the aviaries on a hillside may also permit rain runoff of water to enter the aviary structures and mix pheasant manure. Upon bringing the applicant's property into compliance with zoning setback regulations for accessory structures and establishing the permitted number of fowl allowable on site, it is recommended that the following improvements be made to the remaining aviary structures to reduce the potential for waste runoff in the drainage area and creating a public health nuisance. Number 1, all remaining aviary structures must have shallow surface swales dug around their perimeters to intersect and prevent runoff water from entering the aviary and mixing with pheasant manure. 2, the tarp coverings on all remaining aviaries must be extended beyond the aviary footprint so that the enclosed roosting area is kept dry and rainwater does not mix with manure to become odoriferous. Number 3, any straw or mulch used as aviary bedding materials must be regularly raked up and replaced. All used mulch and straw must be composted or bagged and disposed. And then number 4, pheasant feed must be placed in feeding troughs and not dispensed on the ground. Spilled feed shall be cleaned up regularly. By establishing an appropriate number of permitted fowl to be maintained by the applicant and incorporating these best practice policies for management of the pheasant aviaries, the occurrence of any public health nuisance conditions or pollution from contaminated runoff should be prevented. Do you understand his points? Do you accept his findings?
Absolutely. Want more out of him.
So I think that's it for town letters, is that correct?
The rest are just from neighbors and
Phil.
And there's one from your chairman as well.
yes.
Yeah, well, before we read those, I want to just see if there's any other questions at this time from the from the commissioners first. Anybody have any comments or questions right now?
Has anything changed since the last 2 weeks ago?
I haven't touched anything.
Okay. But nothing's changed in terms of your application or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
Were you on site when tree on the staff one,
Yes.
so this is no surprise to you.
No.
Okay, is there anybody from the audience that would like to ask a question at this time? All right, so, just see. Well, let's read these and then we'll do a in favor or against. If you want to read, why don't we read the chairman's first, please?
Okay. This is from our chairman, Philip Johnson, who is unable to be with us tonight for business purposes. To whom it may concern, I am writing to express my support for the birds residing in the aviaries constructed by Jim Goodman of Middle Road, Guilford, Connecticut. I met Jim several years ago when we both worked on, oh, wait a minute, I got the wrong one.
Yeah, that's not Phil, that's not Phil.
You can read that one. He's a pretty good guy, too.
Mr. Goodman and fellow commissioners, I have given considerable thought to the circumstances which you bring before the PZC seeking a special permit. As a commissioner, I believe we are keenly aware of the concerns presented by neighbors. We all deserve to live in the peaceful enjoyment of our homes. While you have the support of several neighbors, you also have objections from abutters. Had you come to Town Hall South and consulted with the building department about the permissibility of keeping golden pheasants, I'm sure they would have advised you that this practice would not be allowed without a special permit. Obviously, 20/20 hindsight is perfect, and I am sympathetic to the fact that these birds are your family pets, which you have hatched and raised. I am less concerned about the bio-impact of the waste from these animals, as I suspect in some, their biological impact is less than 2 Canada geese, and we sure have a lot of those around. In cases like this, we are guided by recommendation of the Agricultural Commission. They have suggested that based on the size of your lot, that 16 birds would be their recommendation. I support that recommendation of limiting the number of birds to 16 with one additional condition, that you indicated that these birds can live 8 to 10 years. I would encourage the commissioners to support the granting of a special permit limiting the number to 16, subject to the aviaries being brought into zoning compliance, and that is the special permit will expire in 10 years. If you would like to continue keeping these birds after that time, you would need to come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and seek a new special permit. Respectfully submitted, Philip Johnson, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Do we have to read all these letters? No. Okay. So,
Also, if for possible that these folks might actually be in the audience as
right,
well.
they might want to read their own or say that. So at this time, I'm going to ask anybody in the audience that is in favor of the application and would like to be heard to please step forward, if there are any. Okay, at this time, I would like, if there's anybody in opposition would like to be heard, please raise your hand. Please come up to the mic, identify yourself.
Yes, my name is Edward Flamand. I am Mr. Goodman's most immediate abutting neighbor. I would like to initially make a couple comments on the site plan, the proposed site plan, and then I would also like to read from a written statement. Sure. That I have, because I know I never remember it. And I also have a topography map to go with my written statement, which shows both of our properties.
It's a copy of the letter and the map as well.
Yep.
For the file. Thank you.
So,
You did your address, right?
Pardon?
Did you say your address? Not just a budding neighbor, right?
Edward Lamont, 25 Brookside Drive.
Thank you.
So I have a copy of the proposed site map here for everyone to see. And I have marked in orange all the accessory buildings currently on site, which happens to number 8. One of the things about this site map is there are no lines indicating setback. There's no dimensions on it. And having been in the building business for 40-some years, I would never be able to apply a map like this for any application and have it approved. Another thing, after the site visit by Aaron, Mr. Johnson, and Kevin McGee, one of the discussions that came up was the 1945 survey of the Guilford Lakes versus the assessor's maps. And in many cases, there's a huge discrepancy between the assessor's maps and the 45 survey. And Mr. McGee told me that that's perfectly normal and happens quite often. So, given that statement by Kevin, I'm wondering if it isn't in everybody's best interest that a surveyed map by a licensed professional, given the number of buildings on this site, the water issues, and property line assumptions that have been made about where everything is. Because I've lived there 40 years and no one's ever done a survey on anything surrounding me, myself included. So I'd like everyone, if they would look at this map, you will see the actual topography of 86 Middle Road and the road up behind both of our property. So I'm just going to read this statement. I share a rear property line with 86 Middle Road. More than just sharing a property line, we are both part of the Guilford Lakes Association. For anyone who lives in our small community, whatever any one neighbor does is seen, heard, and affects all of us in one way or another. We don't live in isolation, and we are not far enough apart to not affect one another. The health and value of our community are based on a common sense of purpose in maintaining our quality of life. For some of us, this may mean walking in the timberlands, and for others, it may be fishing and swimming in the lakes. The quality of our lake water is often affected by runoff during storms, whether they are hurricanes, northeasters, snowmelt, or just heavy rains as we have had during the last few weeks. And I'm referring you to my topography map here because I personally had so much runoff from the hill behind my house that I had water coming in the back of my house. If I had had 3 aviaries uphill from me, I know that this water would have contained more than just water. This drainage would then proceed down through the property and eventually reach the storm drains on Brookside Drive, and finally, the lakes. As one of the standards for a special permit, any building or other structure shall be in harmony with and conform to the appropriate and orderly development of the town and the neighborhood, and will not impair the value thereof. In our previous meeting, I presented myself and my wife as extremely concerned with our property values. Like you, We take great pride in our home, where we have raised our children, enjoyed the benefits of the lakes community and the timberlands. Like anyone who has worked his whole life to pay off his house and is looking forward to the benefits of this investment, we feel that our lifelong work is threatened for bringing financial and physical harm to our Guilford Lakes community and environment. The approval of a special permit for 86 Middle Road will bring along with it the repercussions of the water drainage issues and property devaluation of neighboring homes. The granting of this permit would not appear to be in the best interests of the town of Guilford, Guilford Lakes Association, and most of all, 25 Brookside Drive. It is for all the above reasons I feel that the board should not approve the raising, breeding, or selling of any quantity of birds other than what normal zoning allows without a special permit. Thank you.
Can I ask you one question? The recommendations that I read off from Dennis Johnson after doing the walkthrough, would those help you to mitigate your concerns that you said about the water runoff? Or do you feel like his recommendations aren't what is needed?
Well, part of the problem with their site visit is that 9 to 10 months out of the year, the water drains through this property, both pieces of property down through 2 empty lots. And this time of year, you're just looking at rain runoff. The other times of the year, you're actually looking at water that's saturated the ground and moves. And all that ground is soaking wet probably 9 months out of the year. I don't believe a few swales around the aviaries are going to make a difference in related to that. And the other question would be is, where would these swales go to? So, I mean, where would that water drain off to?
I have a question. You mentioned that you had some flooding in your home?
Yeah.
And has that ever happened before?
Once. And that was, the one time it happened before was during winter time and the ground was frozen and there was incredible amounts of rain coming down the hill and it had nowhere to go. Couldn't get absorbed. The last week, that particular night, it had rained all day. And then around 6 or 7 o'clock, we had just incredible downpours at that time. And as you can see from the topography map, the property behind my house is also quite high up. And there's about a 30-foot drop between the upper road and Brookside Drive. So, which is a pretty big drop.
Dennis Johnson and Kevin McGee looked at this situation.
They did
And
look
they
at
looked at-
it, but I referenced the fact that it's kind of the wrong time of the year to look at it because the only thing you're looking at right now is just rainwater runoff. There's an incredible amount of water moving through all those pieces of property the other 9 months out of the year.
Well, he's looking at it with, when we're having a tremendous amount of rain and the ground is all saturated. So this would be your primary time to,
I mean, I think there's a difference between being saturated from rain and the water that just slowly moves through this property most of the year. And it's because most of the property back there is clay. There are parts of Guilford Lakes that are very sandy, but this particular hill back there is pretty much all clay.
I have a couple of questions, just for clarification. The question marks that are next to the birds, what are those?
The question marks relate to, I have no idea how much water is in that ground in that area because I've never been over on that property.
In this steep slope here, is that what you're saying is mostly clay?
Yeah, that particular area is very is pretty much all clay, yes.
Okay, and then what kind of vegetation is growing there? Are there trees or is it barren?
There's a lot of different types of vegetation, trees, brush.
Are they large trees?
There are some large trees,
Some,
yes.
but not predominantly wooded, heavy trees.
Mostly maples, I think, but I'm not sure. Yep.
Any questions?
If we were to, in some capacity, grant the special permit, I believe one contingency was that the structures which are non-conforming regarding property line setbacks would be removed and relocated. Would that help to alleviate some of your concerns about the site as well?
I guess I'm not sure what those buildings would be at this point.
You were pointing out concerns in your letter as well as on here about whether or not these conformed with setbacks. You mentioned how you didn't see setbacks and that sort of thing. And I was just mentioning about how we would, any permit that we granted would have a line in there about how structures that were not conforming with setbacks would have to be removed or relocated. Just wanted to make you aware of that.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues for me, there's nowhere in the zoning regulations that protect me from anyone putting up 20 buildings as long as they don't exceed lot coverage. In this particular case, there's 8 buildings on this lot, and there's nothing I can do about that because they don't exceed lot coverage. And so, personally, I think that's where the zoning law should have some sort of cap, because there is nowhere else in Guilford Lakes that anyone has 8 accessory buildings. And I mean, I realize that's not what the zoning meeting's about, but I mean, that's certainly, and that's a big issue for me too, so.
All right. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else at this time? We're still taking comments that are against this application. Don't forget name and address for the record, please.
If I make it here, then.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you. My name is Herbert Burstein. I live at 98 Lakeside Drive in the Lakes area. I'm obviously less than in favor of the application simply because it doesn't meet special permit standards. I should thank you. I think we should all thank you for the second hearing because without it, we never would have seen the original staff comments. As you know, they're not available to the public until after the hearing, after you receive them. So we do owe you a note of thanks. Without the second hearing, Aaron and the others never would have been back on site. Only because Mr. Flamand, I think, was persistent. And at the last meeting, raised the introduction of site suitability, raised the notion of site suitability and actual on-site conditions. I suspect was their second visit. I'd like to share a couple of things. I'm going to share a letter, and I'm not going to bore you by reading the letter, and I'm not going to take your time by reading the letter. If you would pass those around, I'd also like to share a self-constructed checklist, items which by layman's reference to the zoning code, we would hope you would consider, and items which we would expect to see at this point in time. So if you don't mind, I'll share that. And finally, I couldn't continue without a petition, or in lieu of letters. 16 Lakes area residents have and if you'd submit this to the record, I would appreciate it, have similarly seized upon the matter of special permit standards. But if you permit me, I'd just like to summarize a couple of things. First, I understand, and I think you understand, that you're acting in a so-called administrative capacity tonight. That is, you're not cutting new ground, you're not making policy. You're acting on what is in front of you, and you're acting on what is in the zoning code. The checklist, if you will, outlines what I would think are the applicable conditions, both that arise from the agricultural section of the code and that which arises from the general special permit requirement that's not unique to this circumstance. And if you look at them, I think you might agree that the standards, which are embedded in the code, really might be summarized as doing no harm. Don't harm the water, don't harm the environment in general, don't harm the neighborhood, and don't harm property values. And in this case, as Mr. Flamand has indicated, we may be talking about a single property. I also think I understand that in this instance, as opposed to a variance which you would not consider, applicant hardship, and even then of unique nature, doesn't really enter into the discussion. And Connecticut law speaks to that, and the letter documents much of what I'm saying. But if I may, I'd like to then suggest 7 facts that I think, or at least what are to me facts that appear to pertain to the application. First, if you look at figure 1, the figures or illustrations are in the back of the letter. You will notice that Mr. Flamand may have been understating the fact that he lives close to the applicant's property. Per town maps, the so-called interactive maps, Mr. Flamand's house is 8 feet from the property line, and it's 8 feet from the property line because many houses in the Guilford Lakes were built well before zoning. As you may know, the Lakes area was subdivided in 1930 and began to be built out accordingly. Secondly, in general, the applicant and his daughter, his representation was that he and his daughter love golden pheasants, and that's why they want them. The term enamored was used at the first meeting. And if you'll pardon me, I can't help wondering why the applicant needs so many. I wonder whether anyone else has wondered why you need 41, 31, or even 16 pheasants as recommended by the Agricultural Commission because you love them. Third, on September 19th, Commission members began to think about a phase out or a phase down from the current 31 pheasant population to the staff recommended and Agricultural recommended 16 pheasant limit. At that time, you may recall, the applicant told you that domestic golden pheasants had a bit of a 10-year lifespan. Now, I didn't become a golden pheasant expert in the last 2 weeks, but from my letter, credible sources indicate that domestic golden pheasants, if well cared for, can live 15 to 20 years. In a related manner, we don't know how old each pheasant on the property is. And we, in a year from now, perhaps Aaron in an unfortunate situation, can't identify each and every pheasant on the lot. I wonder if you've asked yourself whether phase out and enforcement of any condition, any phase out condition, are really meaningful in the real world. Fourth, I'll try to speed this up. Another thought about the 16 pheasant recommendation, if you don't mind. Seems straightforward, third of an acre, third of 50, more or less. But 2 weeks ago, the discussion focused on numbers. And I'd suggest to you that only because of Mr. Flamon's efforts has a conversation shifted to site. And the associated standards that pertain to site suitability as reflected in the zoning code. Fifth, this is the first meeting where we've spoken about Guilford Lakes and runoff effect. Clearly, zoning provisions that pertain to special standards, I could give you chapter and verse, but the reference is too long, tell you to consider public health and impact on the environment and on surrounding properties. That's a standard. We didn't, well, fifth, that was fifth. You should never say 6 points or 7 points and not be able to keep them straight. The question about grade never came up before. Mr. Flamon has just reminded you that you got a 55-foot drop between Milford Road and a brook that connects the upper and lower middle lake. And I know there's an engineer in the room who would tell you that water runs downhill. He's in the back row. But to date, to boot, per the illustrations, the stream that Mr. Flamont mentioned, the intermittent stream, flows into a culvert per one of the illustrations on Brookside Avenue, and from there is carried directly into the lakes, and that is illustrated for you. There's nowhere else for it to go. That's a direct connection between this intermittent stream and the brook that connects the two lakes. Guilford Lakes, and there are residents of Guilford Lakes that believe, including board members, can tell you that we do occasionally find, via weekly testing, high bacteria counts. So the matter is real. It's not something that I'm fabricating here tonight, and the concern is real, and that's why there are a number of people from Guilford Lakes, I suppose, and it wasn't prearranged, are here tonight. They have that concern. Then this property value, as Mr. Flamont mentioned, and you know that the state's general statutes, Connecticut courts, and our own zoning code ask you to consider property value. And that's an adjunct to general welfare. And courts have told us that property value is a valid special permit concern. Do you think having 16 pheasants, 8 or even 20 feet from your house, is not going to affect your property value? That's a judgment that you have to make. But the standard is very real. And as I suggested earlier, this doesn't meet all standards. Law says, and staff hopefully has dealt with this before, it doesn't meet them all. You can't approve it. Finally, well, a seventh point, and I hate to mention this, but good intentions don't count. Perhaps I shouldn't mention this, but the applicant has documented having pumped his septic tank since the year 2006. It may tell you something about good intentions, and it may tell you something about water quality. I'll leave that to your judgment. Finally, Mr. Flamon has mentioned the application before you, and I'd like to approach it from a slightly different perspective. As you probably know, once approved, it runs with the land. It is not unique to the applicant. That makes clarity very important and relative precision very important. As the applicant on September 19th told you, and I will quote, "Aaron and I have already got preliminary plans." Well, I could assume, I'd have to assume, that those plans were the site plan that Mr. Flamon mentioned and that you have before you. If so, one wonders how staff comments, which the land use, what is the proper term for the land use, Guilford Land Use Office's handbook suggests should already be incorporated in the plans at this point in time. Not as an afterthought, but at this point in time. And that so-called checklist, I think on page 2, contains extracts. There's a flow chart of the process, and there is a textual statement that echoes that thought. They should be here, and if they're not here, you can't see them. We couldn't have seen them. We can't react to them. Mr. Flamond has mentioned accurate relationships to adjacent property. If this zoning enforcement officer and future zoning enforcement officers don't have a clear record of where you wanted things to go or you approved things, where are we? Because this runs with the land. As a relative layman, I would assume, and I think Mr. Flamon, who did not tell you, he is a very experienced and very fine contractor in town. Those are things that a layman would expect to see, and we don't see them. And you don't see them, and if no one sees them, it would seem you could write a laundry list of conditions, but we'd have no reference for them. It seems to me, at least, that this application doesn't come close to meeting the standards and conforming to the process that the town has established. Perhaps because raising animals on smaller than permitted lots is difficult. It poses these problems, and I'd suggest to you that this situation merely exemplifies those kinds of problems. It is a slippery slope. Thank you for your time and patience.
Would anybody else like to speak in opposition without repeating anything that was just said by the previous two people? All right. Anything else from the commission?
I have a couple more questions for Mr. Flamon. Yeah. I have a couple of questions for you. Only because again, I need to satisfy myself. My degree was geology, and part of my studies was both groundwater runoff and coastal processes. The question, are there birds in this location right now that's near?
I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay, do you know how far that is from your property line? Is that the 8 foot?
Probably less than that, probably 4 to 5.
Okay, my question for you is, where is your septic system on your property?
My septic system occupies the whole front yard.
All in here?
Yes.
So the leaching fields are out here?
All the way down through here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have, where's your well located?
The well is somewhere back under part of that house over there, yeah.
So it's under the main house?
Yes.
Okay. So the distance, I don't know, it just looks like the distance from the back of your house or where the well would be is probably a good, I'm going to say 50 feet or more from where the closest birds? Is that a fair?
Probably, yes.
Okay, that's all.
Any other questions at this time? Get a motion?
I just have a question for the applicant.
Yeah.
Where is the location of your septic tank?
My septic tank is real close to the back of the house. When you're looking at the map, the structure that they're bringing up, it is right now probably 3 or 4 feet from the property line. It's a rectangular one against the back property
And where is your well?
underneath my house.
Underneath?
Would like to add, there's a lot of concern and justified concern about environmental impacts, property values through Guilford Lakes because of runoff from my birds. And numbers are a big part of the game because you have to put something down in regulations. But from a personal standpoint, I don't like how we're grazing past the fact that an adult golden pheasant is only 1.3 pounds a bird. You'll probably come up with a biologist around here that will let you know that 2 pounds a bird is twice that potential impact as 1 pound a bird. All 31 of the birds that I currently have right now, weight-wise, add up to that of less than 6 chickens, when zoning code does say you can have 12 of them. You know, it's not, certainly in my head, it's not a number 31, it's half of the potential impact that I am zoned for. And the fact that all 31 of my birds are probably quieter than 2 chickens.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just wondering if there's anyone here from the neighborhood association, a representative of, to speak on this?
Don't see it. Okay.
You do have in your files letters from...
You can't keep talking from there. You gotta come up if you're gonna address it at that mic so they can get you. And you gotta have to do your name and address again, unfortunately. No worries.
James Goodman, 86 Middle Road, and I just wanted to remind the commission that in your files are letters from every other one of my adjacent properties that are in support of the whole project, including the 2 homes that flank the downstream end of this ditch that's been discussed. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to motion to close the public hearing.
Also, second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's closed. Okay, Lori,
Apologies for pronouncing.
yeah, I'm gonna try it in Barnaba, at 131 Old Quarry Road. This is a CAM, so it's only one hearing.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Clinton Brown. I'm a professional engineer and certified planner from Lorero Engineering Associates. Our offices are at 100 Fort Hill Road in Groton, Connecticut. As we heard in the call, the application is on behalf of the property owner, Laurie DeBonaba, and the project involves a coastal site plan review for replacement of tanks, underground tanks that are on the premises. The property is a single-family residence with an on-site septic system and on-site well. It's about an acre in land area and fronts the coastline down here at the bottom of the sheet. The tanks, there are 2, a 500-gallon underground propane tank and a 1,000-gallon underground fuel oil tank. And they are located right behind the garage Here's the garage, main house, driveway, and they're right in this yard area here. From what I can tell in researching the records, the tanks were installed at the time the house was built in 1999. So given that the kind of rule of thumb, if you will, for underground tanks is 20 years, it's time to dig them up and move them out. So what the applicant plans to do is exactly that, to remove those two tanks and replace them with a 1,000-gallon underground propane tank. So there'll be no more fuel oil stored underground on this particular piece of property. Given that the tanks were installed in 1999, they obviously are not contemporary with respect to design and all the considerations that go into tanks today. They also were not, of course, subject to the requirements of the flood protection standards that exist today. So the new tank will achieve both of those. They'll be compliant with all of the current regulations and requirements for tanks, and the tanks will be properly secured to the ground. There's a detail on the plan with an anchoring system. That's a proprietary system that Highland Tank uses. Highland Tanks is one of the largest tank installers and distributors in the country. They are very good at what they do, and they have very good products, very comfortable with their use underground in all types of situations. With respect to the actual construction process, we anticipate, obviously, that the area around the tanks will have to be excavated to access the tanks. So we've identified a soil stockpile area here. This is all open lawn, very easy to work on, no steep slopes or anything like that, and also some additional erosion control measures down on the side closest to the water. We also have a detail on there for the sediment fence. So we believe this is a fairly straightforward process. The project was reviewed by DEP. They mistakenly thought that the tanks were above ground, so their comments were premised on that. Fortunately, your town environmental person and your town engineer recognized that was not the case and suggested some appropriate stipulations for your consideration, and the applicant is agreeable to abide by those stipulations relative to the installation of erosion controls and making sure that the work is done in a responsible manner. When the tanks are all hooked up and tested and ready to go, all the material will be backfilled around the tanks, compacted, loomed, and seeded so the lawn will look just like it does today. Any surplus material will be removed from the site, and if there is any tainted soil encountered, it will be stored separately and will be removed from the site. It will not be put back in the ground. I don't think we have too much potential for any groundwater conditions here. I did look at the soil tests that were done for the septic system, and there was a good 9-foot depth to, and there was no groundwater or modeling. So we don't think we're going to run into groundwater in this location, which is a nice deal when you're doing tanks. So we think at the end of the day, the project is consistent with the coastal area management requirements, and the most important aspect is obviously getting the aged tanks out of there and getting the fuel oil out of there. So we think those are two big pluses, and again, they've reached their estimated functional life, so it's time to move them out and get contemporary with their requirements. So that's the project in sum. Be happy to answer any questions you have of me. And that's basically it.
Where's the water in that, to the property? You were mentioning.
The well is here,
Oh, okay.
and the septic system is right here on the other side of the garage, and that soil test is right there at the end of the septic system.
Carol mentions a 5-foot buffer of the AE zone line. Could you show on the map where that is?
The AE zone line is right here. So on the inboard side, it's zone X, and on the other side, it's AE.
So currently, your area for temporary stockpile is split in half between the buffer, basically.
Yes, yes.
Did you have any response to her suggestion or her request?
I had a response, and I think your staff did too. I thought it was unreasonable. We have erosion controls. This is a very stable site. It's not a steep slope. It's not erosive. It's about as far as we can get from the water and still stay on the property. So I think the appropriate precautions have been taken to minimize any potential for any impact on the coastal environment there.
Why don't we do Kevin's letter? That might answer.
Sure.
Somebody.
There's a letter from Kevin McGee, the environmental planner. He has some suggestions. In order to make sure that the coastal resources are protected during the construction process, I recommend the following conditions of approval. Number one, the town of Guilford zoning enforcement officer should be notified to inspect the sedimentation and erosion control measures prior to any site work. Soil stockpiles should be contained by silt fencing and/or hay bales. Soil erosion and sedimentation control measures shall be maintained until vegetation is established or suitable material is installed to the satisfaction of the zoning enforcement. Number two, temporary stockpiles that should be removed from the site following the completion of the tank removal and replacement. Number three, if contaminated soil is to be removed, it should be placed in roll-off containers, which can be relocated off the property when severe flooding is predicted. And you mentioned that you're aware of these conditions and that
Yes, we are.
complying is fine.
The applicant is agreeable to those stipulations.
He addresses, in that letter, Kevin also addresses the 5-foot line, saying that he doesn't feel that it's because it's a short-term project that there's an issue with the soil stockpile and the FEMA flood zone, so we'll take that.
The 1,000-gallon tank is going to sit on a cement base, correct?
Actually, a sand bed, and then the base is the tie down for the strapping system that keeps it that's the anti-buoyancy measure.
Cable going over the top of the other side, which holds it in place in case of water coming and trying to lift it out.
That's correct.
Also, you're going to have soil on the sides of it on either side, which is being able to be penetrated by water so that the tank does not be affected by that or eroded or anything like that.
Right. Again, it's very stable in here. There's actually a couple of short walls that step down to the waterfront here. So, again, it's not steep slopes or anything like that we have to worry about.
Around the tank, there's a soil that is able to absorb the water that's coming down the sides of it.
Well, there's a sand bed in the bottom is their standard installation. I don't know that it goes up the entire side of the tank. I don't think it does, from what I've seen. The water can still penetrate through the soil here. This is actually fairly sandy down here, from what I saw in the soil profiles. So that will allow water to penetrate into the soil also.
You still have a cement base underneath it.
Absolutely.
That's what's going to hold that tank down.
That's the idea. It's an anti-buoyancy measure to hold the tank in place.
I'm pretty sure they make sure that the soil on all sides of that tank, all the way around, so far out, maybe a foot or so, is going to be a soil that will not let the water that goes down through the ground get against the tank and erode the tank over time.
I would not anticipate that happening here.
Okay, any questions from the audience at this time? Okay, anybody wishing to speak in favor? Anybody wishing to speak against?
Close the hearing.
All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you.
66 High Street. Special permit modification for site work. The first public hearing.
Good evening. My name is Ronald Nault. I'm a professional engineer with the firm of Luke's Consulting Engineers, DeCarlo and Dahl, and we are the architect and engineering designers for the project at 66 High Street. By way of quick background, as you may recall, 66 High represents the conversion of an empty, contaminated, industrially zoned factory site into a new, clean residential community at the edge of downtown. The project received full approval of the Planning and Zoning Commission, including CAM approval, on February 18th, 2015, generally as it exists today. Work was as follows: hazardous waste removal, DEEP septic system installation, renovation of the old mill building, and eventual construction of 3 new buildings with supporting roads and infrastructure. The project is roughly 50% done, and the LEAP building is under construction as we speak. In the process of making the community desirable, the need has arisen to add a community recreation swimming pool area, and that brings me to you tonight. Before I get into the details of the proposed pool, let me take a minute to talk about the separate DEEP activity on the site. Upon initial application, the project was submitted through the CAM process for a low 3-foot-high precast retaining wall along the marsh perimeter to support the driveways and utilities on the landward side of the marsh. As part of the town P&Z approval, a requirement was made for rear access ring road along the backside of all the buildings to allow for emergency vehicles, and which required the supporting wall along the marsh. In the process of constructing this, there was a small encroachment into the DEEP coastal jurisdiction area. We are currently cooperating fully with DEEP to pull out a segment of the wall and vegetate the resulting shoreline. DEEP has suggested and approved the concept of the wall segment removal and the wall areas to remain. Now, as to the swimming pool, let me do this. The first plan here shows existing conditions as we exist today, with portions of the low wall that exists. This plan, the site plan, shows the proposed swimming pool and the pavilion support building away from the coastline, from the marsh tidal wetlands line. Per town standards and staff review, the pool area has been elevated to be above the 100-year base flood elevation. The area will include a small structure to house bathroom, shower, changing rooms. There will be a separate elevated area, enclosed area, 1 foot above base flood to house pool equipment and chemicals, all in that area. The proposed pool is in an area only visible by residents of the 66 High Street complex. The pool location is in an upland area that Planning and Zoning Commission previously approved for the community recreation gazebo area. It is no closer to the marsh than the gazebo was. Also, I'd like to clear up some misconceptions that I've heard about the pool. There will be no filling of any tidal wetlands associated with any activity relative to the pool, and there will be no change in driveway or site access. I've submitted a written response to comments the town received from DEEP under the CAM review process, but to paraphrase, we strongly believe that the low wall in discussion does not qualify as a significant flood and erosion control wall. They aren't intended and don't prevent flooding of the site. I won't bog you down with this, but it's an important distinction with DEEP. The site is also not conducive to open public access. Public access is not in the town plan of development for this area. It's inconsistent with the private residential nature, and insufficient room exists to separate the two uses. and other areas exist nearby with full public access. These issues have been discussed and agreed to back in 2015, and nothing significant has changed relative to public access with the project that should affect these prior approvals. As I mentioned previously, we're complying fully with DEEP in their consent order, and there is no reason to withhold your approval waiting for separate action with DEP. In summary, we are requesting the community recreation area approval be modified to include a swimming pool in an area that you had previously approved for the gazebo. Thank you.
Got a question for Mr. Knoll.
Go for it.
Just, and this is pretty clear in my mind that this pool is totally devoid from the previous project that came before us located on Hillock Street.
Correct.
This is going to be on the grounds of the complex itself.
That's right.
The road that was mentioned doesn't go on the wall side of the pool, it goes around the pool.
Right. The
Right.
fire department emergency access
Okay.
road is shown in a hatch mark.
Yeah.
Hard for you to see, but it's on the plan.
Excuse me, what's the size of the pool?
Roughly 20 by 40,
Okay.
less than 5 feet deep.
Yep.
I have a letter here from Kevin McGee, environmental planner for the town, dated today. The applicant is applying for a coastal area management review for the ability to keep several sections of an erosion control structure that was installed within Planning and Zoning Commission approval and Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection review. Sure. Portions of the erosion control wall were installed within tidal wetlands and below the coastal jurisdiction line, as you mentioned. The CTD was submitted, has submitted a notice of violation to 66 High Street LLC for the work conducted with their jurisdiction and has issued a consent order on February 23rd, 2018. The consent order notes that no CTD permits were issued for the wall. The retaining wall did not receive coastal site plan approval, and the retaining wall has resulted in the creation of public nuisance pursuant to Section 22A-108 of the general statutes. The proposed plans submitted show the removal of a portion of the non-approved erosion control structure, which calls for the installation of a living shoreline structure. Carol Zemansky, Environmental Analyst 2 with the CTD Bureau of Water Protection and Land Reuse, has requested that the commission hold off on acting on the application until the structure's dredging and fill permit has been issued by CTD. Also, as part of the application, 66 High Street LLC would like to install a swimming pool adjacent to the tidal wetlands. The Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection regulates the discharge of pool water and requires pool contractors to be registered under the general permit of the discharge of swimming pool wastewater. The general permit provides standards that the contractors must follow while working on pools, which include limits on chemicals being discharged and the requirement to discharge the subsurface infiltration system. Since this application is dependent on a CTD approval, which could change the proposed plans, I recommend that the application be tabled until CTD issues a permit for the erosion control structure and the living shoreline, which are constructed in areas of shared jurisdiction.
Carolyn, too?
I don't have Carol's. Oh, I do have
Okay, go
Carol's.
ahead. Go for it.
To the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission, copy to Kevin McGee, Coastal Area Management Review, DEP.
They wrote it.
Yes. Coastal site plan for previously constructed flood and erosion control wall around the perimeter of the property, mandatory referral, and to add an in-ground swimming pool and remove sections of the wall which were constructed below the coastal jurisdiction line at 66 High Street, Guilford, Connecticut, being the applicant. Dear Commissioners, thank you for referring this coastal site plan review dated July 31st, 2018 to us for review and comment. The site is subject to a consent order Long Island Sound 2016-3812, dated February 23, 2018, with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. A structure dredging and fill was to be submitted within 90 days to May 23, 2018. The applicant has submitted this permit application on August 8, 2018. We respectfully request that the commission not act on this application until the structures, dredging, and fill permit application has been reviewed and acted on by the department as requested by the consent order. The project description: the subject property is a 15-acre site which was previously hosted a factory and now has been converted into residential condominiums with additional buildings constructed on the site. The zoning district is I-1, an industrial district. Adjacent properties are zoned residential. The applicant has constructed a perimeter road for fire service access as well as several flood and erosion controls walls and is seeking permission to construct a swimming pool at elevation 8. The applicant's engineer should ensure that the swimming pool is constructed to withstand flooding events, which sometimes can break apart the concrete base of a swimming pool due to greater loading. Coastal resources on the waterfront site are significant and include extensive tidal wetlands, coastal hazard area AE10 and AE11, shorelands, and developed shorefront. Public access. The site and conditions have been changed at this site since the original approval. We respectfully ask the Commission require public access at this site given the new site alterations by the applicant, including installation of a fire service road, several flood and erosion control structures, and below the coastal jurisdiction and proposal for a swimming pool. The tidal wetlands are extensive on this 15-acre site, and the new fire service access road, which now skirts the perimeter of the tidal wetlands, could provide a ready-made platform from which the public could view the tidal wetlands. If a 2-3 public parking spaces cannot be reserved for the public on the site at the time, there appears to be sufficient street parking nearby for the public to park and walk on the fire service perimeter road to view the wetlands. The Chittenden building, proposed with a ground floor elevation of 7 feet in an AE10 and AE11 flood zone, the first floor elevation will be at 17 feet. We would like to see the elevations of the building to ensure that sufficient flood vents are being provided. In conclusion, we hope that these comments are helpful to the Commission pursuant to Connecticut General Statute Section 22A-110. We request that these comments be read into the record at the public hearing for this application. If we can be of further assistance on this or any other coastal area management or Long Island Sound related matter, feel free to call us 860-424-3138. Carol Szymanski, Environmental Analyst 2, Land and Water Resources, Connecticut DEEP.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's pretty much hers and Kevin's response, so you guys are, makes sense.
And just let me, I probably took too many liberties thinking everyone was familiar with the project in sight. I'm sorry, but the old mill building with the iconic 66 High Street is here on the front of the mill building. South Fair and High Street make the bend here. The pool is proposed flanked by the Whitfield building that is completed. The Leet building is being framed currently here. The pool here, wide open West River Marsh all the way out to the railroad tracks to this side. So as I was referring to, only visible by residents of the 66 High Street complex.
All right, there seems to be one more letter. This one comes from the Historic District, and it says, "Dear Mr. Johnson, at this time, Guilford Historic District Commission will refrain from comment on the above-mentioned application for shore stabilization and possible pool at 66 High Street. Although the Commission has reviewed other projects at 66 High Street, it's in our opinion that we presently do not have jurisdiction over the proposals in this application. Our state enabling legislation limits to reach our structures visible from the public street, way, or place, and the Whitfield Historic District ordinances specifically states, quote, that the terms public street, way, or place shall not be constructed to include the West River, end quote. Until more details available on the pool and the fence, it's not possible to know what the visibility of these structures will be from Halleck Street and its extensions. At that time, based on visibility from landside public rights-of-way, we may exercise our jurisdiction. Beyond our role as a local historic district commission, we also function under the state certified local government program as adjunct staff to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Please feel free to call us on that capacity if we can be any assistance, and that is Ann C. Street, who is the chairman. That was dated September 26th. I would love for you to clarify.
About the request for tabling, I think several of the letters requested that you table this application until such time as DEP acts on the permit, on their permit application. In addition to the tabling suggestion, this application is a special permit revision and therefore requires a second public hearing unless you vote by a 3/4 majority to waive the second public hearing requirement. So while the coastal site plan application only requires the one public hearing, because this application is also a special permit, you do have to have a second public hearing unless you vote by 3/4 vote to waive that. Now, the issue of tabling the application wouldn't actually come up until after you've closed the public hearing, at which point you have a lengthy period of time to deliberate and consider whether to act on the application, and you would have the opportunity to table action during that period of time. So the first question is, after you've heard from the public, do you want to waive the second public hearing requirement, in which case you'd have to have a 3/4 vote to do that?
Thank you. It's good clarification. You guys all get it?
George, I have a couple questions about the public access. The first question I had was, did the DEP ask for public access during the initial 2015?
Yes.
Is that something that they requested, but it was not part of the permit that was granted?
Correct.
Okay. And then the second question is, if public access was granted, would that area then fall under the jurisdiction of the historic district commission?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Like if it's considered, I guess I don't know the answer.
I don't know the answer.
All right.
Probably gonna have to find out.
Sure. Could we do some research on that?
Yeah. I don't think we're gonna
I specifically
close this
asked
one
that
tonight.
question about visibility of the pool from surrounding streets, because I
Well,
saw
and
that.
that's why I'm
come up.
asking that question, because
Right.
obviously if the fire road becomes public access, then it clearly would be within public view.
Right.
Well, if that's, if that's the answer to the question, I guess that's why I'm asking the question.
Very good. Any other questions at this time from the commission? We're going to go with questions only at this point from the applicant. Please come up, name, address for the record, come up to the mic, and if you don't have to move the mic, it's just kind of picking you up for the TV voice.
Hazel Carby, 27 South Fair Street, which is the street adjacent to this. I have a question with regard to the issue of code violation, and it relates to the future commitment to respect all DEP codes. So this application includes a letter from the DEP stating that this incursion of this wall, which is actually not a small incursion, as we heard, the incursion of this wall is actually a violation. The front page of the application does not actually tick the box that says that this application is in response to a code violation, which it is. It also says that the code violation was inadvertent. And speaking to the question of future attention being paid to DEP codes, I'd like to ask how a code violation could be inadvertent unless you are actually ignoring the codes. Thank you.
You could try to answer that. I'm not going to take a stab at it. Unless you want to answer it.
Yeah, go ahead.
The violation resulted from the front face of the low retaining wall being placed waterward of what's called the coastal jurisdiction line. And in Guilford, it's an elevation. It's elevation 4.0 specifically. Tidal wetlands are a true boundary delineated by a certified scientist to delineate tidal wetlands, which we had. We had a very well-respected biologist to delineate tidal wetlands. He mapped them. Where the violation occurred is the face of the wall existed below this elevation 4, which is not anything anyone would see on the ground. It's an elevation, and the wall face violated that in a couple of small locations, and that is our violation. Never filled any tidal wetlands, and the action is fully under the jurisdiction of DEEP, and we're complying fully. Just a construction phase mishap.
Could you answer the question about what this speaks towards your future following of deep regulation?
Well, boy, there's been, $20 million worth of work put in place so far, and we have one small violation. We have a fully approved deep septic system on site. I'm trying to think of any other areas of author. There hasn't been any filling of the tidal wetlands or anything in that order. We fully expect to comply. This was, as I mentioned, a construction phase of a mishap of something that you wouldn't see out there. The contractor didn't, he mistakenly put the wall in the location, never crossing the tidal wetlands line, which was defined with stakes. So it was a little bit of a mishap. No other deep violations.
Any other clarifying questions? Anybody would like to? No, you need to, don't just ask, you got to come up. Sorry, get your name, address. Everything's on record, just to be legal.
Adam Maynard, 49 South Fair Street. What percentage of the retaining wall was included in your original application to DEEP?
Percentage? I could probably show you by way of location.
Yeah, could you show me?
The town application for a building permit showed the wall along here and the wall along here when the P&Z added the requirement for the fire access road. So the marsh is tight. I'm kind of tracing the boundary here. So it's tight to the back of this building here, and to leave room for the full access road that the fire department required. Requires the wall, and DEEP has no issue with this portion of the wall. The area of the wall they're having us remove here is around this area where the fire department access road isn't as close. So
I'm fully aware that I could be misinformed on this issue, but I spoke with someone at the planning office, this must have been 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and they said that this segment here was actually the only segment that was included in your original application. I don't know if that registers with you, but.
Sure, so that's what I was, so the application showed this wall. When P&Z required the fire department access road be added, this wall was added to the application.
To DEEP? It was added to the DEEP though?
It was added, it was submitted, so we don't submit anything to DEEP under this process. We submit a site plan application and a CAM application. The town then forwards our application to DEEP.
Can someone on the commission maybe clarify where the jurisdictions lie here? Because that may be some of our confusion here, is what's under your purview, what's under DEEP's purview, and this seems to be a little tricky, so can you clarify that?
All right, Aaron?
Like Ron had said, the coastal jurisdiction line, which is elevation 4, anything waterward of that jurisdiction line is state jurisdiction. The tidal wetlands, state jurisdiction. Anything landward of that elevation is local jurisdiction.
Let me just add also to that, I mean, the important thing about where we are with this process is that the plan, the final plans, the revisions to this plan and the final plans have to be the same. The town has to approve the same plan that the DEP approves. So the applicant has revised the original approved plan and revised what was constructed in accordance with the direction of DEP. They don't have a final permit from DEP, and there is no permit yet from the Planning and Zoning Commission. What we want to make sure we do is both the state and the town approve the same plan so that we then can enforce those rules on the applicant. So in order to construct this project, it's going to have approvals by both the town and the state of the same activity.
Does that help?
Yeah, I guess I have one more clarifying question, which is, I was led to believe in my meeting with the staff member at the planning office that, I don't know what percentage of this is, but, this first third or first 25% was what was included in the original application or review, and that what was put in by the team after that point was new and was not, under their original review or was not under the original plan. Is that correct, or was that misinformation?
I believe the original one came around the Whitfield building, to the corner of the Whitfield building is what the original wall was on that rear driveway. Conditions of the original special permit application were that the access way be constructed in compliance with what the fire department was requesting, and I think that is some of the discrepancy of the width that the fire department required along the lead portion of the fire access road, which led to the applicant installing walls that were not shown on that original plan, but were as a result of what they were working with the fire marshal or the fire department. So yes, I believe that portions of that wall were constructed that were not on the original special permit CAM application. And I think Ron has confirmed that.
Is that also a violation, or is it just is the violation the fact that they installed additional seawall without deep?
They were only issued a notice of violation from the state.
But I think this is really the same question. Michael Denning, 27 South Fair Street, which is just a clarification of the consent order, which actually says that on or before September 9th, without authorization, the respondent conducted the following work as follows: installed a 210 long concrete block wall, that's number one, a 70-foot long concrete wall, and constructed sections of a northern one. It then, in two further points, says, respondent did not receive a certificate or permit from the commissioner under sections therefore for that work in that paragraph. By virtue of the above, the respondent has violated those sections. The respondent has not received a lawful coastal site plan approval from the town of Guilford for the installation of the retaining walls. And then the installation, the one that you quoted, that has resulted in the creation of a public nuisance. And so I guess part of the question is the DEP correct in basically saying that there was no authorization in the first place for this and there was no permit for this?
That's what I said. Yes, yes.
Right.
There are portions that were done without a permit, yes.
Thank you. It's not small either.
Any other clarifying questions at this time?
If you want to ask a question, you need to come up and identify yourself.
Adam Maynard, 49 South Fair Street. Why did they build a seawall without a permit?
So, I'm correct, part of that was triggered by the fire, which, right, by the access to the fire?
That is what the applicant
And the
had
fire
said,
was a
yes.
stipulation of the subject.
I think that's going to answer a lot of the question. I mean, this whole thing seems like it's triggered by the fire department and the access road.
Well,
Well, it depends
Right.
on whether it was a stipulation of our permit, though.
Relax.
My understanding is that the Planning and Zoning Commission required that the fire access road be built on the recommendation of the fire department. In building the fire access road, it was determined by the applicant that they also needed to build a wall to retain that road, and they proceeded to build that wall. They, in fact, built it all the way around the whole perimeter of the coastal jurisdiction line. And none of that was approved. The only part of that was approved was the initial section over on the east side of the property. And so therefore, they were in violation of the DEP rules and regulations for not having obtained the permit, and their site plan was they were also constructing improvements that weren't part of the approved site plan, coastal site plan or special permit application. So once that all became known, the applicant went to DEP to talk about what they could do to address the issue, and that's where we are today. They're in the process of trying to develop a design that will satisfy the DEP requirements and also satisfy the coastal site plan requirements. Is that a fair statement of how this all transpired, Ron?
Yes, no, I think that's exactly right. The approval process, as you see in other applications, is iterative. We originally proposed something, the fire department asked for an access road. We had to modify the plan to include the wall to support the road right adjacent to the back of the LEET building here in this area. I should mention that as part of this process, this shoreline will be vegetated and restored to a living shoreline approach. DEEP is in full support of the wall to remain in this location. One other, I guess, point of information, when the process had started, it hadn't been known yet, the full scope, but there are large CLMP Eversource power lines that used to cut across the back of the property. Those power lines were put underground, encased in a duct bank, a PVC duct bank, and that duct bank is encased in concrete as part of this. And so the wall partially also protects a voltage, a high voltage line, 13.8 kV, I believe. So as you might visit the site, you'll see that this is not a major structural wall. It's barely 3 feet high in terms of its retained earth, but it's important in supporting the access road that will be right up tight to the back of the LEET building. As far as the swimming pool, I'm not sure if there's any other questions that I can answer.
When the wall was built, in connection with the requirements of the fire department for an access road, was it contemplated by the developer to have a swimming pool?
No.
Or was the swimming pool contemplated only after the wall was completed?
After the wall was completed and as prospective buyers asked for an amenity, a swimming pool in this case.
Did the wall have to be as far out into the wetland to accommodate the fire department's request for the access road and for the need to have the support of the road, the support of the wall for the road?
Right. So just to make sure, the wall is at the edge of the wetland, not in the wetlands, on the land side of the tidal wetlands, and always was. In this area, it is very tight, and the wall is critical, and that's why removal of the wall here is not that big a deal. The reinforcement of the swimming pool is not dependent on the wall, so DEEP is requiring us to remove the wall in this location. And that's part of the plan. We'll remove the wall, restore this to a vegetated shoreline, maintain the wall here, and maintain the wall here.
Because the road is actually the inside of the pool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. The road here has room to skirt around the pool without going.
What length of the wall will be removed? What's the total, I mean, roughly?
So here's a 100-foot segment of the wall being removed here, and a 40-foot segment of the wall being removed there. Retaining the other portions in compliance with the DEP wishes as we have made permit application.
Yeah, you guys can clarify?
Sure, I was just going to reiterate what George had said. One of the conditions of the original approval, the fire department access road be increased in width to 21 feet over the entire length, and that it be designed to support 80,000 pounds. So I think that was what the applicant was taking into consideration. What's that?
For the weight of the fire.
Exactly.
What should have happened, obviously, is when the fire department and the developer made the determination as to what the exact design of the road was going to be and the need for a wall there, they should have come back to the Planning and Zoning Commission with a revised coastal site plan application to show the wall there. And that would have been the correct course of action, and at the same time submitted a...
That would have triggered something with DEEP as well.
Right, it would have alerted DEEP, it would have, and the developer would have also known that they needed to make a DEEP application at that time. That obviously didn't happen.
We're still going for questions. Yeah, please come up.
Arlene Manjone from 20 Halleck. I just have a question. Did you say that there was high voltage lines that were encased in this wall?
No, they're not in the wall, they're behind it.
They're behind it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Normal underground high-power construction.
And they're under the ground. So when this when this section of wall is taken away, they're still safe? Oh, okay.
I saw a couple other hands, or somebody wanted to say something. This is still questions. We're going to get comments, so please, you still have to come up and do the name and address again.
Hazel Carby, 27 South Fair Street. Could I just ask the question again? Why did they go ahead and build the wall without permission? Because the access road issue, when you sort of wave generally, can appear to be huge, but it actually is about this section which was approved. There was an unapproved section built then, but why did they build the whole thing? Why, is my question, without asking for approval? I'd just like to hear an answer.
I guess I'd go back to my statement earlier about the iterative process of an approval. This looks different, a little bit different from the initial application, just by virtue of the discussions that occurred at a public hearing or hearings 3 years ago. When this requirement was placed, we submitted for a building permit plans that showed this wall. The process of going back to DEEP, shame on me, I guess. I didn't realize that DEEP wasn't involved in the iterative process. No one from Planning and Zoning objected to the wall at that time or at that location. So it was not intentional. It was in response to the fire department access road being a requirement of the project.
Okay, so if we're going to keep asking the same question, I don't think we're going to get any other answers. So if you're going to ask the same question again, don't.
It's a clarifying question. It's not the same question. It's a clarifying. Does anyone have maybe you have it, or does anyone on the commission or planning staff have a timeline of the iterative process where certain sections were approved, work went forward, other, I think that would really help clarify for us and maybe give us some peace of mind, what happened when, and whether or not they had the green light to do that.
Try to get that for the next meeting. Any other clarifying questions at this point? Please.
Amy Goldfarb, 49 South Fair Street. Amy Goldfarb, 49 South Fair Street. I just wondered if there are any plans for any public speaker music sorts of systems, because in terms of noise.
No.
Okay.
How are we on time? Okay. Looking for other questions at this point. Commission, you guys have any other questions at this point? Okay. I'm going to ask at this time if anybody would like to speak in favor of the application to please come forward. Okay. If anybody would like to speak in opposition at this point, please come forward. Once again, stating name and address for the record.
Amy Goldfarb, 49 South Fair Street. I'm not actually speaking against. I just wanted to give some thoughts about the public access idea. Sorry. I'm not speaking against. I'm just, I would like to address the public access issue, if that's okay?
Sure.
Okay. So I live on South Fair Street. One of the adjacent, the development is right over my back fence, and for 3 years we've been watching and listening to the development go up. It sounds like we've got maybe another couple of years to go. We've begun to meet our new neighbors and their dogs, who are very cute, as they enjoy walking through the neighborhood, admiring the historic homes and the many beautiful gardens. The development is also very attractive, a big improvement over what was there before. Aerial photographs show just how beautifully situated the condos are, with long views across the marshes. While there are other places to view the water in Guilford, none are within easy walking distance of our neighborhood or part of our neighborhood fabric. Back when Ken and Ron were preparing to make their site proposal to the town, they held several meet and greets to build relationships with people in the neighborhood. In an attempt to help us feel comfortable with what was ahead, they offered a number of assurances. They would plant dense rows of trees to provide full screening of their garage hardscape. They would power wash our houses to take care of the construction dust. They would make sure their lighting didn't shine too brightly into our windows at night. And they would give us pedestrian access to their walkways along the marshes. Some of these assurances were pictured in mock-ups, others were verbal, none of them were in writing. At the time, we didn't think they needed to be. I myself never went to the early planning and zoning meetings because I felt so comfortable with the neighborly approach of 66 High. Over time, some of us have had to make our peace with promises that never materialized. One promise could still be fulfilled. It would be really nice to be able to have some access to the walkways that give such stunning views of the marshes. This access could be limited in a number of ways, including curfews or available hours, even a badge showing that we are homeowners in the neighborhood, or a password or a secret handshake. Only kidding. This would be a generous and truly neighborly way for the developers to allow for a fuller interplay between the condo development and the surrounding neighborhood. The condos at 66 High Street enhance the aesthetics of our neighborhood and may increase our property values. I also believe that the care with which we in the neighborhood have taken care of our houses over decades and have abided by the rules of the historic district, which is not always easy, also enhance the aesthetics and the property values of the condos at 66 High Street. By allowing some public access, as they originally offered, the developers could make the condos a true part of the neighborhood in the town they love, and not a separate, exclusive, essentially gated enclave. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else like to speak in opposition? And we will have a second public hearing on this, so just, I'm assuming.
Chairman, can I respond, or is that not?
Sure.
So Amy and I have gotten to know each other pretty well. We purposely made this not a gated community. As you know, the neighborhood has full access to the property as it exists today. I think what DEEP is asking for is something that you don't want either. They're asking for public access, would be put on public maps. People would be parking on the streets in front of your house, your neighborhood. The community is open to you, so you'll see, well, perhaps you won't, but a formal response to the town and to the Carol Szymanski from DEEP's letter. We said exactly that we're not opposed to full kind of ad hoc neighborhood access. It's not gated. People walk around the community all the time that don't live there, and we don't intend to change that. I think the public access part is more what happens in the town. I live off of Trolley Road, and the state opened up the end of the road to public access, and it's a zoo down there in the summer.
George, we've seen public access with the Yacht Club's restaurant. This is pretty much standard operating of DEEP with area coastal access.
It's a standard practice of theirs to recommend public access for any coastal site plan application, correct?
Yes, sir. Please, come on up.
While he's approaching, so part of that is that there's, in a residential community such as this, it's really tight. There's not an area to separate the public and the private residents. We invite the neighborhood for certain.
Michael Denning, again, 27 South Fair Street. So I guess actually just wanted to speak for two things, for tabling and for the second public hearing, which will be both the DEEP tabling of this permit until they're done, and so that there be a second public hearing, so that some of us who have not prepared as eloquent as Amy spoke for many of us, I think, there. I would say that one of the issues that is an important one in adding the swimming pool was that in this original project, there was the agreement that they could build far beyond the building thing because 3/4 of the land was wetlands. As a result, there's very little open space on their building one. One reason why that fire road was put right up against the marsh. I'm glad to know that I was not trespassing. I walked that whole wall this evening to see the wall, and it really is right up against the marsh, and it feels like a seawall, though it says it's not. If you walk along it, it feels like a seawall. And so I think that the reservation that many of us might have about the swimming pool is partly putting more of the building into what was already an overbuilt piece of property. So those are the only things that I reserve the right at the second public address to having review some of the more material. Thank you.
How we doing, Pete? Oh, okay. Anybody else like to speak in opposition at this point?
Adam Maynard, 49 South Fair Street, just briefly and echoing Michael's statement, until we have more clarity around the timeline of kind of how things went down and how this developed, I think it's impossible for us to say really how we feel about the way things developed, and want to have that clarity. Thank you.
We have no opposition, not opposed to the second public hearing. We have nothing to hide. We're not opposed to the commission hearing from DEEP. The only thing is that we don't want to get caught in a catch-22 that DEEP says, well, they can't decide until the town decides. Town can't decide it until the state decides. The state process, the application is exactly what the DEEP regulator requested of the project, and I think perhaps a conversation between Aaron and the DEEP staff could confirm that. My hope is that you could perhaps come up with, if you like the other aspects of the project, come up with a condition of approval that nothing gets done until the DEEP approval. But DEEP application doesn't operate on the same time frame as you do as well. And other than that, we'll see you at the next public info meeting.
To clarify, I did speak with Kevin Zavoy, who is responsible for reviewing the application, and he was the gentleman who issued, the DEEP staff who issued the consent order. I spoke with him via email on Friday, September 28th. He says he's reviewed the permit application and drafted an additional information letter. At this time, he's not able to determine consistency of the project, so holding off on any additional local approvals appears to be appropriate. When I receive the requested information, consistency will be determined, and the application can then proceed to public notice.
And just to make sure that Aaron and I are talking the same language, the limits of wall removal are exactly as he requested. The crossing the T's and dotting the I's are what he's referring to now, and that will occur in a supplemental submission to him on aerial extent, some other aspects of DEEP. But we're on the same page. We're not opposed. We're nothing to hide. The commission should see what DEEP suggests, but we think we're almost there with DEEP. We just didn't want to be subject to the time frame that they might drag this out.
So do we move, we have to table and move, because right now it's only a, just move to second public. Right. Right, I'm going to assume nobody wants to make a motion to close this tonight, right? All right, so can I get a motion to extend it to the second hearing?
Second.
Who did it?
Sean.
Second, all in favor?
That'll be October 17th.
October 17th. All right, thank you. We'll see you guys on October 17th. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna go. You want to do? Yeah, you want to swap that out until we deliberate? Okay, we're gonna pause the meeting. No business will be conducted while we are in recess. Thank you. Okay, we are back. I will assure that no business was conducted while we were off camera. So I need an approval of the revised agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we'll deliberate on the first public hearing, which was the James Goodman, 86 Middle Road. So,
Motion.
Please.
Voted that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve a special permit for James Goodman for the keeping of golden pheasants at 86 Middle Road, map 60, lot 37, as shown on an application dated August 10th, 2018, and at a public hearing on September 19th and October 3rd, 2018. The application is approved with the following conditions. 1, that no more than 16 birds are allowed. 2, the cleanliness and operation of this aviary shall be conducted according with the best practice managements for keeping all wildfowl aviaries and the Connecticut Public Health Code, Section 19-13-B1. The structures which are non-conforming regarding property line setbacks be removed or relocated. This special permit expires on October 1st of 2028. This application is approved based upon the findings with condition number 3 being implemented. It meets the requirements of the zoning code. The special permit is effective October 12th, 2018, and upon filing with the town clerk.
Do you want to specify that Dennis Johnson's points are also added, or is that covered under this
I think
project
they were
management and
covered.
keeping waterfowl? Yeah, so
I think he meant to include it, but I think it'd be better to spell it all out.
Yes, I agree with you, George.
his 4 stipulations, we should add them as, on your motion as well. If that's fine with you.
So you'll include them?
We'll include the 4 conditions of Dennis Johnson after I go through mine. Anybody got that one handy? I got it right here. I think the four conditions based on the note of Dennis Johnson dated October 3rd, 2018.
Okay, so we have
They're
a,
read into the record.
Yeah.
yep, okay, and we got a second. So for discussion, I'll open it right up to you guys. Anybody have any pressing or any concerns?
With the complaint about water runoff, but, with the,
I feel like it behooves us to fall back on our Director of Health's recommendations when it comes to this type of scenario. I mean, he certainly walked the site.
I'm kind of with you, because that's why we have these people for
Right,
their
we're not
expertise.
experts when it comes to this sort of scenario.
And it
I
wasn't
s-
just Dennis, there were, didn't we also, it was also Kevin McGee,
He was also there, yeah.
who's our environmental planner.
Right.
So this says that no more than 16 birds are allowed. There are currently 31.
That's what was stated, yeah.
But they would have
And we took that recommendation off of the agricultural,
Right, I understand.
yeah, so,
And that was based on taking the percentage, the ratio of 1
Sure.
acre to 50, right? Cutting it down to
Yeah,
16.
to what a third was.
There is the practical question of how the applicant gets from 31 to 16 birds.
That's the nature of my question.
Yeah, and I think the best thing would be just to rely on zoning enforcement officer to kind of work with the applicant. We don't expect him to, remove them all in one day. I think there probably would be some reasonable accommodation for how that might actually happen. If you're so inclined to allow us to kind of work that through.
As long as it's not 4 years from now, that we get down to
Right.
16.
also like to point out that our chairman, Phil Johnson, had sent that letter on behalf, that was read into the record, supporting this proposal as was read and seconded, so just make that one more note. Okay. Any other discussion?
I don't think there's any problem with the birds, because the only thing that and I didn't hear any complaint about any noise or anything like that, or I don't see where we can be against it. I obviously, from looking at this thing or listening to everyone, they're a little upset of the way the property looks, and that doesn't affect whether or not he can have his birds or not, unless his birds are causing a problem or something. But I see no reason why we'd object to him having the birds. If it's a blight situation, then that's something that the enforcement officer, I'm sure, can handle it with no problem at all. So if they have a problem with the property, the way it looks, then that's to bring it up to the enforcement officer, and she knows the rules. She'll go out there and straighten it out. And therefore, when his birds actually are going to cause no problem. They're not in anybody's sight, or they're not going to bother anybody. So I see no reason why we could turn him down, as long as he sticks to the rule that his property does not justify 30-something birds. But we'll put him down to where it belongs, 16. He's going to drop it back to 16. Again, our enforcement officer is going to see that that's done. So I see why we let it go.
Thank you, Alan.
Just add one more thing. Alan was right. I read through some of these letters. A lot of them were about the existing condition of the property. It's a whole different issue. We're talking about the birds, not what is going on the property outside of that. We've rectified the aviary.
Okay. All right, any other comments? Hearing none, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Oppose or abstain? Motion passed. Okay, we will go on to the CAM, yep, on 131 Old Quarry Road.
Voted, the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve coastal.
Just a little louder.
Louder?
He's got the written version right.
Voted that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve coastal management application for removal of 2 underground oil tanks and replace with 1,000-gallon tank for Lori, how do you say that name? DeBrani? Yeah, 131. 131 Coy Road, map 6, lot 6A, shown on application dated August 7, 2018. The application is approved with the following conditions. The application is approved based upon the finding that it conforms with the zoning and it's consistent and with the coastal management policies of the state of Connecticut.
Any discussion on this? Pretty straightforward. Yep, all in favor? Aye. Abstaining, none, carried. Okay, we moved High Street to the second public hearing, so subdivision, Vigliotti Construction. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little letter just to maybe put something out there before we begin, from our attorney, Chuck Anders, to Aaron Mannix and George Kroll, and this is the fee in lieu regarding. Dear George and Aaron, you asked whether the commission has authority to require an applicant to submit a fee in lieu of land as opposing to dedicating land to satisfy the open space requirements of the subdivision regulations. General Statute, Section 8-25 provides that the commission may authorize a subdivision applicant to pay a fee or pay a fee and transfer land in lieu of the obligation to provide land for open space. See excerpt of statute below. Although the text of the statute is not wholly clear as to whether the commission can require the applicant to submit a fee in lieu of land, case law suggests that it can do so. Property Group, Inc. versus the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Tallinn, 29 Connecticut, App 1823 from 1992, Affidavit 226, Connecticut 684-91 from 1993. Parentheses, quote, Section 8-25, sets forth with specificity of the power of the Planning Commission to promulgate regulations for the exactions from developer for open space, parks, and playgrounds, or to exact from the developer a fee in lieu of open spaces, end quotes. Fitzgerald versus Newton Planning and Zoning Commission, 2007, WL 1893157, Super CT 1993. Accordingly, I believe the commission does have the authority to require developers to submit a fee in lieu of land to satisfy the open space requirements of the subdivision regulations, if the subdivision regulation authorized the commission to do so. Assuming the commission has authority to adopt regulation requirements, an applicant submit a fee in lieu of open space. The next question is whether the regulation allows the commission to do so. The Guilford subdivision regulations are not wholly clear as to this issue. The pertinent regulations are set forth at section 272-41.d of the subdivision regulations, which provide D. Fee in lieu of land, 1, where dedication of land as open space will not meet the purpose of this section. The commission may request that the developer/applicant pay a fee to the town or pay a fee to transfer land to the town, parentheses, or other acceptable entity, end parentheses, in lieu of any requirements to provide land. 2, if payment of such a fee is proposed by the applicant, the commission may refuse such a fee if it determines that there are acceptable areas in the subdivision which merit preservation by one of the methods set forth in these regulations. 3, if approved by the commission, a fee in lieu of the land shall be paid to the Land Acquisition Fund of the town in accordance with section 8-25 of the Connecticut General Statutes as amended. Some of the terminology of this section suggests that the decision to pay the fee at the option of the applicant. For example, the regulations state that the commission, quote, may request, end quote, the developer to pay the fee, and does not explicitly state the commission can require the fee. Nonetheless, the regulation also states that the fee option is appropriate, quote, parentheses, and what is that? Where dedicate, okay, so I'm trying to be, it's an attorney wrote this, so. Open space will not meet the purpose of this section, end quote. And the regulation also provide that any land that is acceptable as open space, quote, should be in locations deemed proper by the commission, end quote. Section 272-41B, subsection 1, subsection C. Section 1, subsection C. According. Another feasible interpretation of the regulations is that the commission can require the applicant to provide a fee in lieu of land, but only if it finds that the dedication of land as open space will not meet the requirements of the regulations. See the general purposes in section 272-41A, 1 and 272-41B, section 1, subsection B. Accordingly, whether the commission can require applicant to file a fee in lieu of open space is not wholly clear from the regulations. If the commission believes that it should definitively have such authority, I would recommend amending this provision of the regulation. I understand that the applicant has requested a waiver of the open space requirement because it's proposing a conservation easement. Under the regulations, the commission has the authority to waive by a three-quarter vote the requirement to dedicate land as open space, section 272-41E. As to whether the land burdened by a conservation easement satisfies the open space requirement, I would suggest reviewing the request under the criteria set forth in section 272-41B-1B, which addresses how much of the open space may be wetlands or steep slopes. I also note that section 272-41D allows the open space requirement to be satisfied by a combination of land and a fee. I hope this is helpful. Please let me know if you need additional information. Chuck Anders. Section 825 provides in part, such regulation shall provide that the commission may require the provision of open space, parks, playgrounds, when in place deemed proper by the planning commission, which open space, parks, playgrounds shall be shown on the subdivision plan. Such regulations may, with approval of the commission, authorize the applicant to pay a fee or municipality to pay a fee to the municipality and transfer land to the municipality in lieu of any requirement to provide open space, such payment or combination payment in the fair market value of the land transferred shall be equal to not more than 10% of the fair market value of the land to be subdivided prior to the approval of the subdivision. The fair market value shall be determined by an appraiser jointly selected by the commission and the applicant. A fraction of a payment, the numerator of which is 1 and the denominator of which is the number of approved parcels in the subdivision, shall be made at the time of the sale of each approved parcel of land in the subdivision and placed in a fund in accordance with the provisions of section 825B. The open space requirements of this section shall not apply if the transfer of all land in subdivision of less than 5 parcels is to the parent, child, brother, sister, grandparent, grandchild, aunt, uncle, first cousin for non-consideration, or if the subdivision is to contain affordable housing as defined in section 8-39A, equal to 20% or more of the total housing to be constructed in the subdivision. Charles R. Andrews, attorney at law. So, it's definitely a legal answer that we requested. Just wanted to start that off. I know you got some stuff to say. And
Good evening, Chuck Mandel, agent for the applicant. I'm still a little confused about this whole thing. Erin had instructed me to read the regulations thoroughly, and I did, and I have a copy in front of me. So I guess if we go to, well, first of all, does everyone remember what I said last? Okay, so we don't have to go there.
as far as, has anything changed?
No.
We had some, we didn't have any questions as far as that goes, right? It was pretty straightforward? Okay.
Yeah, the only proviso is that we're going back to wetlands. There's a pipe that's going to be removed, but that doesn't affect the lot yield or anything else. Per section 272-41-2, this open space requirement may, with the approval of the commission, be met through letter D is some other arrangement that shall be found by the commission to be acceptable, and a conservation easement was one of those conditions. This whole thing came about when I was listening to the application before me 2 weeks ago, and they were going to dedicate a conservation easement restriction as opposed to the land to be going to the land trust. Town staff during the meeting, George was there. There's no open space that's accessible. They don't want it. So we were proposing a conservation easement. This area here, it's about 2 acres, 23% of the property. I would say, in regards to steep slopes, I'd say about 50% of the 1 acre. There's a steep slope here, and there is a band of wetlands here. This was a mowed hayfield, so you could walk it if you really wanted to, if you can see that. Oh, this is Long Hill Road, and this is Alpha Ave. We're just north of Alpha. So I guess my request is we are going to dedicate 23% for conservation easement, and we are requesting the waiver And I'm not really sure what, I mean, I looked at the statute too, and, well, Chuck's the lawyer, so I really don't understand. But it appears to me, and I'm not an expert, it appears to me that the regulation needs to be tightened up a little bit, so there's no question in the future this doesn't come up again. It's either, and I don't understand why you just wouldn't do a fee in lieu of. If the open space not available, the developer should put it in a trust. But as I said earlier, I didn't think it was fair for my client to have to do it when the previous application, you waived that with conservation easement.
What Chuck had said, and our attorney, Chuck, had said that as a commission, you have the ability to grant a waiver of the open space requirement, but you could also look at this particular conservation easement area to see if that could be acceptable as open space, as opposed to granting a waiver of open space altogether. And
Clarify, how would we assess whether something would be appropriate as open space?
so,
Look at the criteria that are in the regulations.
in the subdivision
Karen,
regulations,
She can read that to you.
I have copies of that if you want, and it's under 272-41A. And that, I can pass that around to you.
Chuck, in our phone conversation initially about the fee in lieu of, I just want to clarify one thing.
Yeah.
Did I mislead you into thinking that this was something that I could mandate of you?
In fairness to you, George, most towns do require fee in lieu of, and that's not an option. And I was led down the garden path, I guess, that I believe that it was that I had to give the 10%. That was my, and that's my fault, George. It's not yours. I really should have known these regulations, and if I had any question, this issue shouldn't even have come up, and we shouldn't be having this discussion. This should all have been resolved before and not waste everyone's time.
That didn't answer my question, but it doesn't really matter. I certainly didn't intend to suggest that.
Well, that's okay. I'll fall on the sword. I don't care.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's fine.
So will I.
Okay.
So the commission, Chuck Andres had said that if this conservation easement area met the criteria of dedication of open land, it's at least 10% of the total area. As Chuck said, it's 23%. And this area that's dedicated to the conservation easement does not consist of a greater percentage of area classified as wetland or water course, 100-year floodplain, or slopes in excess of 25%. Then
Isn't that whole thing wetland?
No, the whole middle portion is
It's
upland.
actually the blue, this is an area of wetlands here.
Okay.
This is all upland.
Oh, okay.
This was all mowed hayfield at one time. And now, and down the steep slope, this is all wetlands in here.
As you see in this section, there are 3 or 4 criteria that sort of stand out as possible candidates for meeting the open space criteria here, including wetland protection, scenic, special wildlife or something to that effect. So there's a lot of discretion in that. I personally don't think you should consider this waiving the open space. The only real issue is, do you interpret your regulations to give you the authority to require that the applicant pay the fee of $16,000 or $17,000, whatever the number was? Do you believe that the wording of the regulations, as highlighted by Chuck and elucidated a little bit by Chuck, give you that authority?
And just one more thing. Originally, since this is an R30 zone, we were going to dedicate almost all this property to open space, yet the town staff at that time did not want this as open space. We were thoroughly willing to give more than we needed to.
Almost seems to be like what the previous applicant that he's referring to earlier in the class. The land was...
Yes.
Draft motion to approve this subdivision, and one of the conditions is the open space subdivision condition, the fee in lieu of condition, so you could vote that particular condition up or down and then proceed with the motion. Or just by
Proposed
consensus?
motion, it's a conservation easement.
Includes the conservation. And also has an optional condition there, which is italicized, I think.
Number 6.
That part of issuance
Yeah.
of building permit, that any lot payment.
So our suggestion is you adopt this motion and either include number 7 or don't include number 7.
Number six.
Or 6, excuse me.
And prior to that, though, I would like to know what the criteria is, whether you require the fee or don't require the fee. Oh, okay.
That's what condition number
All right.
6 is.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
We add number 6, you're paying the fee.
Right, that's what and that's what I don't understand.
You want to know why?
Yeah, I want to know why we would have to pay a fee when the previous applicant didn't have to. What's the criteria for taking our money? Well, not my money, but the applicant's money. If it's justified, that's fine, but.
Well, I think Chuck Andrus had addressed that a bit in your memo, that if you feel the commission should be able to do that, then you should address that as an amendment to the zoning regulations
Yeah, I think
in the future.
regardless of
That
what you
at this point,
excuse me.
sorry, yeah.
Regardless of what you decide in this particular case, I assume you would probably want us to work with Chuck to revise the subdivision regulation in this respect, to make it more clear, abundantly clear, absolutely clear, that you have the authority to do that. And then people can argue the merits of an amendment to the subdivision code, sort of as part of the normal
Respectively, that
process.
would be great, but we're doing now with.
That's the immediate question.
That's
relevant
right.
question that's.
Can
in the
you or
moment.
do you want to make that requirement now as part of this application?
And in very easy terms to understand, through all of that 3-page letter, once again, it was yes, you can, or no, you don't have to. So,
What Chuck's pointing to is the specific language in our code which says you may request a fee in lieu of. I think a lot of this revolves around, what does the word request mean?
Does that mean require? No.
That's for you to interpret. What do you mean? You wrote this regulation. What did you mean by request? Did you mean require?
That's a good question.
I think the regulations need to be tightened up a little bit, I guess,
That-
is my point.
We all stipulate that.
I just think in this particular, we set a precedent 2 weeks ago. And
Yeah, I
this
see-
gentleman feels that he should be entitled.
I'd say strike 6 and go with 1 through 5.
somebody needs to make the motion. However, that person deems it's a big one, and I can't read it, so. Somebody has to read it, though. I can't read it.
I can read it.
Go for it.
Now, I'm going to read this, but I'm not going to include 6.
That's your
Whatever motion
Okay,
you want to
voted
make.
that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve a subdivision application for Vigliotti construction for 4 lots at map 57, lot 205, as shown on, quote, residential subdivision Long Hill Estates West, unquote. 4 sheets dated 6/15/17 revised 9/5/18, prepared by Thomas A. Stevens and Associates, Inc. This application is approved with the following conditions. 1, lots 1, 2, 3, and 4 shall have septic system design plans prepared by a licensed professional engineer. 2, that prior to any site work or building permits, inland wetlands permits are required for any work on lots 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 3, that a digitized copy of the final subdivision plan be submitted in PDF format. Number 4, the language of the conservation easement shall be in accordance with the standard conservation easement documents of the town of Guilford. The terms of the easement shall be made a restrictive covenant running with the land, binding on successors and assigns. If a conservation easement is not approved by town meeting, the applicant shall file a deed restriction with similar language. The conservation easement shall be filed in the land records at the time of filing of the approved subdivision's map. No building permits shall be issued, and no site work conducted until the conservation area has been properly marked with iron pins and signage at approximately 50-foot intervals and at turning points. Number 5, that prior to site work, the zoning enforcement officer shall be notified to inspect the sedimentation and erosion control measures. Soil stockpiles shall be contained by silt fencing and/or hay bales. Soil erosion and sedimentation control measures shall be maintained until vegetation is established or suitable material is installed to the satisfaction of the zoning enforcement officer. This application is approved based on a finding that it conformed to zoning and subdivision codes of the town. The subdivision approval is effective on October 12th, 2018, and upon recording of the approved plan as per Section 8-25 of the Connecticut General Statutes.
Second.
All right, we got a motion that was presented, we got a second, and, I mean, everything makes sense in the motion. I don't think we need to do the semantics of that. I think it's more on this fee.
So I understand the point of view of, I think, Richard, you mentioned about setting a precedent 2 weeks ago. The only thing in my mind that sticks out is that 2 weeks ago, I felt like we were operating under the assumption that this was a choice that the applicant could make. It wasn't a choice that we could make, is what it felt like we were operating under. So that's what makes this decision different, because now this is us making, I feel like that's what makes it different in this case, is that now we, with, what our council has said and that sort of thing, it feels like it's us making the decision now as opposed to 2 weeks ago when I felt like we were under the understanding that the applicant got to make the decision.
You would not
I mean,
support this?
that's what I felt like was what everyone was talking about 2 weeks ago, was that the applicant got to make the choice and we didn't really have a choice.
That it was optional, whether or
Yeah,
not he wanted to.
correct. Whether he wanted to
make
give a
that-
fee or not. And so we didn't really have a choice at that, it felt like we didn't really have a choice at that meeting, because that was what we were operating under, was the assumption that he had the choice, not us.
Well, if I can just speak to that, that's part of the problem.
Sure.
The regulation isn't.
Yes, absolutely. I understand that.
Well,
I'm just describing to the commission, that's kind of what my feeling is, what the difference is. In terms of, when we're talking about precedents, that's my feel like the difference between the decision we made 2 weeks ago and the decision we're making now.
So would you support the motion as made? Maybe.
I'm gonna need a minute to actually
Okay.
decide that.
Any other comments?
I think in other business, we would remand this to be investigated,
Yeah, no, definitely.
to be rewritten.
Right.
They were, but then they changed their mind.
No, but you're
No,
talking about.
2 weeks ago.
You're talking about the other
The other
application.
application.
Lauren, how
I was
they
speaking
had
to,
the
I was
choice
speaking to
of
what
whether or
Mr.
not-
Wallace said about the precedent we set 2 weeks ago with the other application.
It's the same situation.
In that case, it was the same situation, but we were presented with, the applicant had the choice to give a fee or not. And then when the applicant said that he did not want to give a fee, then we ruled based on that information. Since then, we have had a ruling from our council about, it's not actually the applicant's choice, it's our choice. And so that's why I feel like.
That's not
That's
exactly
not
what Chuck
what
is
Chuck
saying.
is saying.
He's saying that
This-
you need to interpret what request means, whether that's a.
Well, that's what I mean by
He's
our
saying
choice.
by
Request versus
statute, by state statute, commissions, he believes based on case law, commissions can require that. Whether your existing
Sure.
regulations as written
So-
support that is unclear.
So then I misspoke. I did not mean it was our choice. It was more of, we are, instead of talking about whether or not the precedent, we get to decide what we mean by request. Whereas we did not have that, that wasn't what we were talking about
Right.
2 weeks ago.
The only difference between this application and the one before is that this applicant had previously a written agreement to pay fee in lieu, which now the applicant is requesting to withdraw that.
Right, because he happened to be lucky and be here this, which, he, like he said, he made sense what he said, that he'd be doing an injustice to his client if he didn't bring it up. And frankly, it made me think about it, so. We agree. All right, any other discussion? Call the vote as the motion was presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstaining or against? How'd you vote? I missed it. Well, regardless, it passed. Right?
Abstain.
And Alan's abstaining. Yep.
Thank you for your patience.
You got it. All right, we are going to move on. We have somebody that has been waiting very patiently. Robin Dostie. This is 35 Boston Street, map 40, lot 158, zone C1, a site plan revision to a change of use from office to hair salon. We're going to receive this and request action. Take action on it.
Hi, I'm Robin Dostie, and I'm just requesting a plan of change. It was a real estate office, and I want to turn it back into a salon, which it was historically, for a number of years.
Where's 35?
Where the French teaching school is, right across the street from Guilford Savings Bank.
Oh, really?
On Boston Street? Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and this was a real estate office.
And we're,
By Mary Beeman's house?
we're all checked with the boxes. Parking's good.
Right.
This is-
No septic issues going from.
That was the initial concern, was septic. And Dennis said that
Didn't he
they've
write a
gone
memo
back
on
and
that?
forth, and
Yes.
Dennis has written a memo.
Okay, please read it.
Dennis Johnson, Director of Health. Evaluation of the current site septic system with regarding the existing leaching capacity and past water usage indicates that the applicant's proposed change in use from office to hair salon can be approved. The proposed salon will contain 6 styling chairs and 2 permitted washing stations. The water conservation salon fixtures and green operating practices will be incorporated into the salon's design and operation. It is recommended that the applicant proposed change be in use be permitted.
Okay, that's good for my knowledge. And but we have to, there's a motion made for this somewhere? Or? Anybody have it?
I got it.
Read it, please.
Voted that the Guilford Planning and Zoning Commission approve a site plan application for a change of use from office to hair salon by Robin Dostie, 35 Boston Street, map 40, lot 158, is shown on an application dated 9/19/18. This application is approved upon finding that it conforms with the zoning code.
Straightforward, any discussion, any concerns from anybody? No? Call the vote, all in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Unanimous, thank you, good luck. Okay, before I do the approval of the minutes, Alan just wants to address the commission really quick. You still want to do it?
Yeah, I guess I do. There's been a lot.
We got a 3-minute rule, by the way.
He's been hitting me with that all night.
Thank you.
I see that we're trying to get a situation in town where we're going to do away with plastic bags and straws. And one of the things that bothers me, being very very conscious of the environment, is that we have a serious problem in the town of Guilford. And it's because we're on the coast is where this problem exists. And it is this right here. There they are right there, right in front of you. I'm living on the coast, I'm living near the water, and I see this all the time. The fishermen are complaining about this a lot. And I don't think the people in Guilford are not conscious of this. I think they're just not paying attention enough to it. Because, for instance, when we had graduation in June, the fishermen were going out there, and one fisherman, a friend of mine, came in the West River, in the mouth of the West River. He stopped and picked up 52 of these in the water. And this is affecting our wildlife. Very serious problem, very serious problem. And I think we need to be more conscious of this. If I was in a dollar store, as a matter of fact, and a little girl had one of these. And I went over and I told her, I said, when I told her about the problem we're having. I said, when you're all through with it, you want to probably let the air out of it and put it in a thing. She understood it. The kids understand this when you tell them. I think the people don't realize that when they tie them on the post, on their mailbox, or they tie them on the back of a chair, and the party's over, they don't let the air out of them and throw them away. And then sometimes they slip away. And they get out in the water. And they're affecting our wildlife and our fish. And this is a very precious thing we have here. So I think we ought to take more care of these things, especially these things, because these are the things that are getting the water. I don't see many straws there. Not saying it isn't important, but this is very important for our waters around in Guilford and all the coastal area.
Yeah, they can come from miles away, too.
Yeah.
You know, they can travel.
I had one of these. The reason I have this is I lived right on the water. And I woke up this morning, I look on my back deck, and there it is sitting there, okay? And if it wasn't sitting there, it would have been sitting out in the wetlands, okay? And this is affecting all of our wildlife. So I think we ought to take more care and pay a little more attention, all of us ought to pay a little more attention to these things. Be sure that when you're through using them, don't shut the lights out and go to bed. Be sure you let the air out of these things and keep them out of our waters. 52 of them he picked up. And a lot of other ones told me the same thing. They've been picking them up right along, stopping their boats and picking them up. So please, take the time to let the air out of them. I know you're not doing it purposely, but please remember that you have these things. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
You should go to Channel 8 with that.
Okay.
Go to Channel 8 with that.
So, we have the approval of the minutes. I reviewed them. Anybody have any, not see any changes? All set, so all in favor? And then I would like to, motion to adjourn. Somebody? So move second. All in favor? Thank you. Have a great night. Okay.